Well, Seth, thank you so much for taking time for this. As we start, can you maybe talk a little bit about your current role in the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently I'm at DoubleVerify. They're an ad tech company that's publicly traded on NYSE. And in my particular role, I'm the application security manager. So I came into this position about 6 months ago, having previously been in both financial services as well as consulting. And I am responsible for building out our application security program from the ground up. So that includes our DevSecOps processes, much of data security, cloud security, product security, and offensive testing as it pertains to the applications that DoubleVerify provides to our customers.
I understand. Awesome. And DoubleVerify, and if I read it right, you are in the advertising space. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So what we do at a high level is we provide measurement, verification, fraud, as well as privacy solutions to the whole entire advertising industry. So we work with, on the buy side, the advertisers and ad agencies, and then on the sell side, the publishers and ad servers as well, and everyone in between. So the advertising industry works very similar to the financial services industry. There's ads trades in real times, and so we work with all the players across the board.
I see. Awesome. Well, it's such a humongous already and kind of probably still growing industry. I'm just looking at, given the success of Google, I imagine it's, and also saw that your company, it's pretty sizable. So it's a very, I imagine it's an interesting space to play. But switching gears on back to cybersecurity, it seems like as a field, it's growing into in importance, both at the board level, at senior executive level, and as a result, I think a lot more people are looking to make a career, whether switching from technology to cybersecurity, or maybe even students just looking to figuring out what they want to do with the rest of their life. So, based on your experience, from your vantage point, what would you suggest? What do you recommend to someone who is just contemplating this shift? What should they be focusing on? How should they spend their time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so for me personally, and my background, right, I came from IT into cybersecurity. So I had a little bit of technical knowledge that definitely helped me accelerate my career a little bit more. And then also I ended up getting a degree in business to offset some of the technical skills. So that way in cyber, a lot of people think the technical part is really the hard part, but the reality is, in many cases, the technical part is normally the easiest part, and it's sort of the business and operational risk that's the really difficult part. And so in many cases, for me, what I would recommend is, it's good to come in with non-traditional backgrounds. Not everyone needs to have a background in IT. Not everyone needs to be super technical. Even in my position right now as the application security manager, I do very little actual hands-on coding. And a lot of my time is more spent, helping developers, help them fix their code, or helping teams build the processes and procedures to support the program and the build as it continues to advance and move forward. And so if I had 3 items that I would say is get your hands dirty, try, online hack the box, try hands-on labs. As you can afford. There's really cheap programs out there, and in some cases free, or you can get scholarships for that will allow you to start learning the fundamentals about cybersecurity. B, I think in the world where everything's moving cloud heavy, everything's infrastructure is changing, organizations are changing. Like 5 years ago, everyone said that they were going to do it, and now everyone is doing it. And I think the main difference is having fundamental knowledge of how cloud computing works with the cloud service providers, whether it be Amazon Web Services or Azure or Google Cloud. Any of those will really help you start building the fundamental knowledge. And you don't need a background in IT in order to start learning how these functionals work. It will certainly help. But at the end of the day, there's free online training for all 3 of these cloud service providers that will get you moving forward. And then last but not least, I think, one of the things that people don't often recommend, but I will absolutely recommend, is understanding risk in an organization and how it's handled. Because like I was mentioning before, cybersecurity is definitely an operational risk at heart. And so learning how general risk management is done, and then seeing how cyber is just one of those types of risk, and obviously handles a lot of different components, but at the end of the day, risk management and understanding risk management and how to handle risk within a large enterprise and even a medium-sized enterprise is extremely valuable in the market. And there's plenty of opportunities for students, internships, as well as individuals coming out of more advanced degrees to pursue these, fresh new opportunities in the marketplace. There's plenty and plenty of unfilled roles.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's an interesting point that it's technically just one side of things, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with people and you need to explain, communicate up, I guess, and laterally what the implications are. So people who are not technical or do not have exposure to cybersecurity or do not understand risk maybe that well, they can understand what's at stake and how to make decisions with sufficient knowledge and sufficient understanding what the implications are, what the outcomes are. So it's certainly a very valid point. From your kind of vantage point, from your experience, what do you think the future challenges would look like? Because I think there's a lot of themes that are playing right now. I think a lot of people are focusing. You mentioned cloud security, ransomware is top of mind. Whether it's relates to kind of phishing attacks that add up with ransomware or not. But what do you think 12 months from now? What do you think what are the top 3 things everyone will be talking about in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I think that there's 3 main things that some of them are existing now, and I think some of them are going to resurface. One of the top one that I think is being able to quantify risk as it pertains to the organization. And this is something that I think many organizations struggle with, and there are some tools that help, but at the end of the day, it's in many cases a very subjective task right now, and there's not really to use that can be leveraged in order to properly level set. If you have a threat and vulnerability management program, if you have an incident response program, you have a SOC, you have your application security team, your identity and access management, and really being able to tie those risks to a quantifiable number, and then marrying that to your specific organization or your industry. And I think that's something that people are trying to solve actively right now. I think in the near future, boards and other senior leadership are going to start trying to better understand, with the rising cost of cyber insurance, what should we just accept the risk on and insure versus what do we need to actually move forward and spend our time and money and efforts, with whether it's people, processes, consultants, et cetera, in order to build out these areas a little bit more and get some sort of consensus. So I think quantifying risk is something that in 12 months, people are going to realize, like, cyber is getting very costly. And so what do we need to accept versus what do we need to, work on ourselves? So that's part 1. Part 2 for me, I think in recent events, the supply chain, whether that's mostly a software supply chain, but really understanding how software is designed, built, and executed, deployed, and especially in cloud native environments. So we're starting to see an emergence of these cloud native application security testing tools, which is sort of its own field where they combine cloud workflow protection as well as cloud security posture management, and they put it together with traditional static, dynamic, runtime security testing, interactive security testing, and they put it all in one box together and make it a solution. What it does is it allows you to significantly reduce the number of false positives and the time spent wasted trying to triage vulnerabilities that are identified. And it's pretty accurate with some of the new technology that's coming out there, with some of the existing technology that's out there that's emerging in the space. It's going to, I think, make a significant enhancement to the way that we test these applications on a regular basis and actually help triage pretty significant vulnerabilities that may not be identified from one of those tools independently, that doesn't necessarily have the breadth or depth across your environment and your landscape. So that's cloud native application security testing. And then I think for me, third and foremost, it's going to be a continued increase in training and awareness, and a double down in that space. And so there's a lot of people that they're focusing on ransomware, they're focusing on IoT, and those are definitely big options. And so I think for me personally, and from what I've seen in my background and the industries that I serve, this is my third. And the reason being is because a lot of these other problems, ransomware, et cetera, are caused by a person. And in many cases, it's still educating users and making the education fun and interactive. And so I think in gamification of these educational systems is becoming extremely popular. Ever since 2018, when I started to do some research on the emergence of security training solutions, there were individuals that were, making all sorts of extremely fascinating games that can be rolled out to your teams. And I think security training just needs to be fun. In many cases, it's dull, it's boring, people skip through it, they don't want to listen, has no interest of them. But then when it comes time to do a phishing test on your organization, you have 50% of the people that click on it, 20% of the people that put in their information, you start to realize like maybe what I'm doing isn't working, and there needs to be another way. And so I think the additional gamification, and when I mean gamification, not making things cartoonish, I mean hands-on engagement. I think that's going to be a significant improvement to the way that we train our staff and education. And it's constant reminders. Like, I think there's like the rule of 7. You need to see something like 7 times before it really sticks. And I think in this particular case, it's one of those areas where it affects every single employee at your company, from board members to C-suite down to even interns when they come in. And oftentimes you can see interns making some pretty serious mistakes because there's not security enforcement and security awareness in place, especially for individuals that might only be at your company for 2 months. So for contractors, especially, heavier security training as well as firm-wide. And so my hope is that, security training can be fun for everyone.
Certainly. Well, it's more, again, not to make it cartoonish, but maybe leaderboards and winners and kind of champions. And it's certainly often all those attacks, if you drill down, humans are usually the weakest link because it can patch the software, but sometimes it can patch a human being. And the frontier is moving. The attacks are getting more and more sophisticated. And to your first point, I'm curious because I'm talking to a lot of people and they say that in the past there were a lot more insurance providers who would be willing kind of to step in and insure some of that risk. And recently the trend is the premiums are getting more and more expensive, and some of the players are stepping out of insuring cyber risk completely, which is telling me that they have a hard time quantifying that. So do you think that organizations, because they have internal information that the insurers may not even have, would be in a better position to quantify this risk internally than maybe an outsider like insurance company can do it from whatever they have access to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in all honesty, I don't think I have the answer, right? I can give you my opinion and
Sure. No, that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
I did some, research on this at some point back in like the 2017 timeframe. And obviously the cyber landscape and the risk landscape in general has changed a lot since then. But what I think about it is that it depends on your organization itself. And I think it depends on how much risk appetite you have and how much you're willing to say, yes, this is okay for me, and yes, it's not. The reality, like from one perspective, right, the people leaving the insurance space, that's scary because you need competition in insurance in order for the industry to properly function, right? And I think that if there's less players coming in and there's barriers to entry for one reason or another, or potentially they don't want to insure these because there's another reason. Maybe it's monetary, maybe it's government, maybe there's third parties involved. That's pretty scary. So if there's less competition, that's going to definitely drive leaning towards a monopolistic type market. And I think in any market, when you start to get towards that and you start to begin to shallow, that there's less and less players, that really drives and consolidation in general, that's going to drive a lot of problems. From the what should I accept versus what should I not, and do I need third parties to come in? I think every organization has their own set of difficulties and challenges, and depending on the bandwidth and how much time they're willing to spend, they can then look at that. So if you have enough bandwidth, you understand how to quantify risk well within your own organization, you might not need a third party to come in and actually validate that. But in many cases, when you do cyber insurance, they're going to do their own assessment anyway. And so I think it's understanding, what framework are they leveraging and how are they assessing the risk versus what you think. And ultimately, it depends on your business function as well. If you're working at in sort of the agriculture industry versus healthcare versus finance versus, advertising versus manufacturing. Like the risk in each industry are certainly quite different for everyone. And so the reality is that, maybe a one size fit all solution for insurance doesn't necessarily make sense. And I think it needs to be catered towards industries, which to my knowledge, they already do, certainly. But there dramatically is, like, if you take sensors and you take, printing machines, how do you compare a sensor to a printing machine in terms of risk, right? And then how do you quantify that better? And so there's so many different areas that require just like vastly, there's so many different areas that require a lot of time and effort to put things side by side and really understand, is this important? Is it not important? Do we need to think about this? Do we need to not think about this? Does it affect our business? Does it affect potentially businesses that we've acquired or future M&A activity? And I think that there's a huge discrepancy right now in the market about, what standardized models should be used and how to accept risk appropriately for your own organization. So CISO guidance in this case is, I think, extremely valuable, working with other CISOs in their industry to better understand, what have they said yes to, and then what are they ensuring?
Certainly, makes sense. Talking about Athenia as a concept, as a community of cybersecurity executives learning together, succeeding together, and there are certain, it's evolving, and I want to hear feedback, and I hope you can help us understand what is that we do, whether it's information or kind of upcoming networking opportunities and things like that you think are interesting and valuable. So what are the things we do that's interesting? What are the things we do that it is maybe not as much value that we should stop? And what do you think is missing? I know some members say that it's time to put together small scale face-to-face events that'll be local to various cities. Other people suggesting kind of other maybe events related to larger scale conferences like RSA or Black Hat, maybe more online learning, even though a lot of people have the Zoom fatigue. But maybe if it's very specific and very targeted, it makes sense. From your perspective, like what do you think we should do more of? What should we do less of? And what new that we are not currently doing that you think we should be?
Yeah, great question. So first and foremost, I'm super happy to be a part of the community. And I think the reality is I'm only like maybe a month or 6 weeks old. So it hasn't been too long for me. And I saw a couple of colleagues of mine online that had joined, and I realized like this is a great place for industry peers to just share knowledge and be part of a greater community. And we're always looking for opportunities that make sense, where you can get involved, you can hear other people's voices. And so from that perspective, getting constant updates of where some of your colleagues are that you might have worked with at one point, or you might have, they may have been your client right at one point, and getting these constant updates. And so I think giving shout outs to our industry peers is super brightening when they get to advance their career, when they're landing new opportunities. It's helpful for us as well to share to our networks when there's new opportunities available that might be a good fit for our friends that we have met along the way and colleagues that we've worked with. Networking is a huge component, I think, of any career in general. And I think within cyber, it's just as important. Like I was saying before, your technical skills can speak so much, but your business skills and the way that you network with your colleagues is even more. So being a part of the community in general is a great place to start. And I'm very grateful to be a part of it. So what I think could be helpful in the future is just more industry specific events. So I think that in many cases, being in application security and financial services and being in application security, for example, in the advertising and marketing world it's vastly different. And so what I've learned in these two industries is like what you focus on, what you spend your time on is completely separate. Like the goal is still the same, but how you get there is completely separate. And so being able to speak more with like industry colleagues that are in my particular industry and my level, that would make a lot of sense. And then I think I always like in-person events. I mean, I think we're getting to the point where those are completely acceptable. And so, my hope is that in the next year, things start to open up and we'll be able
Absolutely.
to travel, be part of those communities and share thoughts and wisdom. One thing that I think is always helpful for us, and Something that IANS does well is starting to do like short little research snippets. I guess that's the word, is like, is if one CISO is having a problem, sending out sort of an anonymized poll to the group and audience to get their opinion. Because this way you're getting, for example, if you just put a random poll on LinkedIn, to your community, like you don't know the qualifiers of the respondents. And you're not able to understand that these are like professionals that have been vetted, that are, all interested in the same topic, that have, somewhat similar roles, right? And I think in general, that would be super helpful. So if any CISOs need advice or they need guidance on a vendor, or they need guidance on a selection process, or whatever it might be for their particular organization, I think having the ability to send these questions in anonymously and then have polls be sent out to everyone. And then that way, that the responses that you're getting received are like real information from industry peers and professionals that you can trust. And I think then that might help you, guide decisions right in the future. Like, let's say you're selecting a cloud security posture management solution and you're between three of them, throw out a poll, which one do you use, if not other, and then being able to complete those types of like mini assessments might be a quick wins to help some individuals when they're stuck between one vendor or another. So that's just one idea that I had.
Interesting. And currently, how do you do this currently? For example, if you've narrowed down to, you want to narrow things down from 10 vendors to 3, and 3 you have conversations with, and who would you go to go from 10 to 3?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in part, it's always, what fits your environment the best. It might not even be, in many cases, it might have been a vendor that I've already worked with that I love, but then I look at my environment and I'm like, this just doesn't mesh well with our current landscape and where we're at. So I think that's first and foremost, is understanding how it fits best into your environment. Even if you're friends with these people, if you get tools and technology that don't help you, then they're effectively useless. And you don't want that tech that just sitting around being unused and wasting your budget. So secondly, I would say, look at the industry leaders in the space, people that have, 10, 20, 30 years of experience. And being able to absorb their knowledge and their trust. So there's many people that do presentations on certain types of tools, their limitations, their product roadmap, what they have, what they don't, how their competitive advantages, so on and so forth. And you can, really put them aside and start to better analyze from like, what is the industry saying about these types of tools? But I think third and foremost, and this is where the networking and Affinia can come into play, is like you use your peers. Many cases, especially because I spent time in consulting, I have, quite a lot of colleagues that did, for example, like infrastructure security or something along those lines, threat and vulnerability management. And then I could reach out to these colleagues and saying, hey, we're evaluating tools X, Y, and Z. Shoot me with your best shot, right? Like, I want to hear the best thing that's happened, the worst thing that's happened, and everything in between. And then that way you get a true sense of what it's like to work for these vendors. And in some cases, it's they might be working at the vendor. So it's oftentimes, you try to give an unbiased approach as much as you can. But I think that's the most important part, is really having hands-on operators.
Well, yeah. It makes a lot of sense if you ask to someone who had experience with the vendor, whose opinion you trust, who's kind of a professional in the industry, so they know what are you going through, so they can understand what some of the challenges that you're dealing with, and who doesn't have a vested interest, so that you can argue that their opinion is unbiased and trustworthy. But in the same vein, I mean, would you say that something like G2 Crowd at Gartner, would you not view them achieving the same goal and kind of playing in the same use case?
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful, right? Like, that's one piece of the puzzle. But I think the reality is with Gartner, like, the best product in the market still might not fit your use case as well. It still might not fit your niche. It still might not solve the problem that you have. And I've seen this like over and over again, where you get the best of the best product, you spend all the money in the world on it, and then the reality is you don't even have enough people to man it, to use it, to work it. And then you have to hire an outside third-party consultant. You hire the consultant, you run out of money. The product's 50% implemented, 50% functional. You don't have a team to run it properly. And so oftentimes I think, people get caught up in that trick where they might have had friends that said, oh, this tool is amazing, even though it's the most expensive, you should buy it. And then what you learn is that after you purchase the tool, you don't have the capabilities to implement it. And I've seen this many times with like data loss prevention, DLP tools, where they're massive projects to implement. Companies will spend anywhere from like $200,000 to $2 million on these types of tools, and then need to spend another $1 million on consultants just to be able to implement it properly. And then once you get it implemented properly and you have your use cases built, now you have too much noise and you need to figure out how to get rid of the noise. And so it's, at the end of the day, it's like this funneling effect that often can happen where the best and brightest tool on the market might not be a good fit for your organization. So
interesting point. Well, so thank you so much for taking time again for this. This was amazing. I really appreciate it. And your points about face-to-face events and about opening up channels for members to provide real-time feedback, whether on vendors or certain challenges, it's certainly well taken. We have a lot in the works planned for this year. So we're certainly hopeful to be able to put some of these initiatives in use, and looking forward to your feedback and continued support.
Awesome. And I'm really glad to be here today. And it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Have a great one.